Let me ask you something honestly. If you found out today that the number you've been working toward your entire life, the number you've been sacrificing holidays for, skipping things for, telling yourself one day for, if you found out that number was actually wrong, would you want to know now? Or would you rather find out at 68, sitting at your kitchen table, doing the maths for the first time, and realizing the retirement you planned doesn't match the retirement you can afford? Because that's exactly what's happening to thousands of Australians right now, and most of them had one thing in common. They all had a number in their head, and that number was $1 million. Today we're going to talk about why that number is more complicated than anyone ever told you. Not to scare you, not to make you feel behind. But because the earlier you understand this, the more time you have to actually do something about it. So stay with me. Because by the end of this, you're going to see your super balance, your retirement plan, and that $1 million figure in a completely different way. Right. So where did this $1 million idea even come from? Nobody in government ever officially said $1 million is what you need to retire. There's no legislation, no official policy document, no regulator that set that figure. It got passed around at barbecues, repeated in newspaper columns, reinforced in Superfund marketing for so long that it just became the number. People absorbed it, the way you absorb an idea when you hear it enough times. It just became true without anyone ever checking whether it actually was. And here's what's interesting. A major survey published in May 2026 by Colonial First State, one of Australia's largest wealth managers, found that Australians now believe they need more than $1 million to retire comfortably. That figure jumped by $183,000 in just 12 months. So people aren't just chasing $1 million anymore. They're chasing more than $1 million. And the anxiety around that number is getting bigger every year. But here's what I want you to sit with for a second. The truth about $1 million cuts both ways. And it's not the simple story most people think it is. If you're finding this useful, this kind of honest, no jargon breakdown of retirement in Australia, hit the like button and subscribe to RetireScope AU. We do this every single week. No products to sell you, no fluff, just real information for Australians who want to get retirement right. Now let's actually do the maths, because most people never do. They hear $1 million, they nod, they make it their mental target, and they never stop to ask what $1 million actually pays you in retirement. Here's the number that matters. Financial planners working with Australian retirees generally use what's called a 3.5% withdrawal rate. That's the rate at which you can draw down your super each year without running out of money over a long retirement. At 3.5%, $1 million portfolio generates $35,000 a year from your super alone. Now, the ASFA retirement standard, that's the Association of Superannuation Funds of Australia, and they updated their figures in February 2026, says that a comfortable retirement for a single homeowner costs around $54,240 a year. For a couple, it's around $77,375 annually. So on the face of it, yes, $1 million drawing $35,000 a year falls short of the comfortable standard for a single person. That gap looks alarming. But here's the part most people skip over entirely. The age pension exists, and it does a lot of heavy lifting. If you retire at 67 with $1 million in super, you're likely to qualify for at least a part age pension. Because the assets test threshold for a homeowning couple sits at over $1 million before you're cut off completely. That part pension can add anywhere from $8,000 to $20,000 a year on top of your super drawdown. Which means a homeowning couple with $1 million combined could be looking at total income somewhere between $45,000 and $55,000 a year. That's close to or above the comfortable standard. So for a homeowning couple, $1 million is actually workable. Not lavish, but genuinely workable. But, and this is where the whole conversation shifts, that entire calculation rests on one assumption. One assumption that most retirement calculators, most Superfund brochures, and most online articles quietly bury in the footnotes. It assumes you own your home. Outright, no mortgage, no rent. And here's why that matters so much more than people realize. If you're renting when you retire, the numbers change completely. Super Consumers Australia, an independent research body, estimates that a renter needs around $659,000 in super just to achieve a medium lifestyle in retirement. Compare that to a homeowner who only needs around $322,000 for the same lifestyle. That's double, just because of housing. Think about what that means in real terms. If you're renting a modest one-bedroom apartment in Sydney right now, you're probably paying somewhere around $550 to $600 a week. The full single-age pension pays roughly $600 a week. That's your entire pension gone on rent before you've bought a single bag of groceries. There's a Commonwealth rent assistance payment that helps a bit, but according to recent data, rent assistance increased by about 2% between late 2024 and late 2025. Actual rents in that same period rose 4.5%. The gap between government support and real housing costs is getting wider every year. And older Australians who rent are caught right in the middle of it. Now here's something I want you to think about if you're in your 40s or early 50s. More Australians today are entering retirement with mortgage debt than any previous generation. If you bought property in the last 10 to 15 years in a major city, there's a real chance you'll still have a mortgage balance when you hit 67. That changes your required super number significantly, and it's not something most people factor in when they're planning in their 30s. The homeownership assumption in retirement planning is the silent variable, the one nobody talks about clearly, until you're already living it.
Right.
So we've established that $1 million isn't a simple answer. Whether it's enough depends heavily on whether you own your home. But let's say you do own your home. Let's say you're a home-owning retiree with a solid super balance. Are you safe? Not necessarily. Because there are 3 costs that show up in retirement that almost nobody budgets for properly. And any one of them can make a well-planned retirement feel very uncomfortable very quickly. The first one is healthcare. And I don't mean the cost you're thinking of right now. I mean the gap between what Medicare covers and what things actually cost as you get older. Australians with hospital cover are currently paying 71% more in out-of-pocket gap fees than they were 5 years ago, not premiums, gap fees. The difference between what the specialist charges and what Medicare plus your insurance actually refunds. A single visit to a dermatologist can cost close to $400 out of pocket. A dental procedure in your 70s can run anywhere from $3,000 to $5,000 in a year. And as you move through your 60s and 70s, you're not going to one specialist occasionally. You might be managing 3 or 4 ongoing health things at the same time. And here's something very current that most Australians haven't heard yet. In the May 2026 federal budget, the government announced a proposal to reduce the private health insurance rebate for Australians aged 65 and over. The rebate currently steps up as you age, recognizing that older Australians use healthcare more. Under the proposal, which is set to take effect from April 2027, that stepped-up rebate gets removed. Private Healthcare Australia has warned that for Australians on gold hospital cover or age 70 and above, this could mean premium increases of more than 21% in a single year. For a couple, that's potentially over $1,600 more per year, just to keep the same cover they already have. This hasn't passed into law yet, but it's in the budget. And if it proceeds, it lands directly on the people least able to absorb it. Retirees on fixed incomes. The second cost that blindsides people is inflation over a long retirement. Everyone talks about inflation in the abstract. But here's the concrete version of it. If you retire at 67 and live to 87, which is statistically quite likely for Australians today, you have 20 years of prices rising around you, while your super drawdown stays in roughly the same range. The age pension is indexed, which helps. But here's the problem the data keeps showing. Retirees' biggest expenses, insurance, council rates, utilities, healthcare, and food, have been rising faster than the headline inflation figure. So even though the pension technically keeps up with CPI, it doesn't keep up with what retirees actually spend money on. The ASFA figure of $54,000 a year for a comfortable retirement sounds reasonable today. In 20 years, that number will need to be substantially higher to buy the same life. And if your super is drawn down too aggressively in the early years of retirement, when you're healthy, active, and want to do things, there might not be enough left to handle the later years when healthcare costs really start to build. The third cost is the one nobody ever puts in a retirement calculator, but almost every retiree I've heard of ends up facing it: family, helping an adult child with a house deposit, contributing to grandchildren's school fees or activities, covering a family emergency. These things aren't luxuries, they feel like necessities. And they come out of your retirement savings, whether you plan for them or not. The thing I've noticed is this: the more generous and successful you've been as a parent, the more likely this cost is to show up in your retirement. I know people who've retired in solid financial shape and quietly given $60,000 or $80,000 to their kids over a 5-year period, money that wasn't in any plan, because nobody plans for love. So now let's get to the question you actually came here for. What is the real number? And here's my honest answer. There isn't one universal number. There's your number. And it depends on 3 things: whether you own your home, what lifestyle you want, and how your health holds up. Let me give you some reference points based on the most current data available. If you're a homeowner, you qualify for a part age pension, and you're comfortable with a modest lifestyle, occasional domestic travel, a basic car, simple dining, you might actually be fine with somewhere between $300,000 and $500,000 in super. The age pension does a lot of the work, and without rent, your fixed costs are manageable. If you're a homeowner targeting a genuinely comfortable retirement, good health insurance, a newer car, some international travel, regular dining out, the ASFA February 2026 figure suggests around $630,000 for a single person and $730,000 for a couple. If you're a renter, those numbers go up substantially. Super Consumers Australia's estimate puts the figure for a renter at around $659,000 just for a medium lifestyle. And if you're renting in Sydney or Melbourne, factor in even more. And if you're a renter in a major city, no pension entitlement, and you want a comfortable lifestyle, honestly, you're probably looking at somewhere north of $1 million, possibly significantly north. So the $1 million figure isn't always wrong, but it's also not always right. And chasing it blindly without knowing which of those categories you fall into is where the real danger lies. Here's what I think matters more than the number itself. Knowing your number, your specific number, based on your situation. ASIC, the Australian Securities and Investments Commission, published research in April 2026 that found 48% of Australians aged 50 to 66 are worried about outliving their savings. Nearly half. And only a third said they were confident of being financially comfortable in retirement. That's not a money problem at its core. That's an information problem. People don't know what their number is. They've borrowed someone else's number, $1 million, and they're hoping it fits. So let me give you something practical to do right now, depending on where you are. If you're in your 40s, the single most valuable thing you can do is open MoneySmart. It's the government's free financial guidance website. Use their retirement planner. It takes about 10 minutes. You put in your current balance, your salary, your age, and it projects where you'll be. Most people who do this for the first time discover something that either reassures them or motivates them immediately. Either outcome is useful. And if you're not on track, you still have time to change that. An extra $200 a month in salary sacrifice at 42 looks very different by 67 than it does right now. If you're in your 50s, catch-up concessional contributions are worth understanding properly. If you've had years where you contributed less than the annual cap, which for most people is quite common, you may be able to carry forward that unused amount and put in more than the standard limit in a single year. This is one of the most underused strategies in Australian super, and it can make a meaningful difference in the final stretch. Also, review your private health insurance before you turn 65. Not at 65. Before. Because if the rebate proposal from the May 2026 budget proceeds, the landscape for private health insurance in retirement changes significantly from April 2027. Getting across your current policy, what it actually costs after the rebate, and whether there's a better structure for you is 20 minutes of your time that could save you hundreds or even thousands of dollars a year in retirement. If you're in your 60s or already retired, understand the assets test and income test thresholds for the age pension properly before you make any financial moves. Because how you structure your assets, what sits in super versus outside super, what you give away and when, has a direct impact on what pension you're entitled to. The rules around gifting, deeming, and the family home exemption are specific and consequential. This is genuinely the area where talking to a licensed financial advisor who specializes in retirement pays for itself very quickly. At RetireScope AU, we're not in the business of selling you a product or sending you in a particular direction. What we care about is making sure you're having these conversations with the right information, not borrowed assumptions. Because the Australians who navigate retirement well, and I've noticed this again and again, they're not always the ones who earned the most or saved the most. They're the ones who knew what their actual situation was early enough to do something about it. $1 million might be your number, it might not be. But the goal is to stop chasing someone else's answer and start finding your own. Drop a comment below and tell me, what number have you always had in your head for retirement? And after watching this, has it changed? I read every comment, and your question might genuinely become the next video we make. And if you know someone, a mate, a sibling, a parent, who's still running on the $1 million assumption without ever actually doing the math, send them this, not to worry them. Because knowing the real picture early is always better than finding out when it's too late to adjust. See you in the next one.